Hello and welcome back to Chit Heads. I'm Khalid, one of the learning navigators at Embodied Philosophy, and I'm excited to open up this episode. Today, Jacob interviews Nikki Costello, an educator with 30 years of teaching and training experience in the yoga and wellness industry. She works at the intersection of social justice and yoga with a focus on facilitating new models of embodied leadership. Nikki is a senior Iyengar yoga teacher and a certified yoga therapist. In 2016, Nikki was named one of the 100 most influential teachers in America. She is the featured Iyengar yoga teacher on Glow. In this episode, Jacob and Nikki talk about courage, safety, and trust in sadhana, rethinking how we learn and how we create community within the framework of a yoga class, pedagogical practices that support or inhibit access, belonging, and diversity, and the virtual classroom as an opportunity instead of a limitation. We're jumping right into this honest conversation as Nikki, who is a PhD candidate at the California Institute of Integral Studies, expresses the challenging, the rewarding aspects of balancing in-depth, structured scholarship with her lived experiences as a yoga practitioner. We hope you enjoy.
Actually, let me say it this way. One of the kind of great boons of realizing that there are these continued sort of places in your sadhana where you need to kind of hone in, tune in, refine. It is certainly for me, and we started talking about this notion of being able to plan everything out and to kind of, approach things in this progressive way, or somehow I'm going to move along from this and then I'm going to do this. It's really a wake-up call when we start to do that to such a degree that we are actually placing a kind of chasm between that which we know to be true around the spiritual life and how grace and these kind of moments of wonder and things come from a place that we haven't conceptualized, where it's like, oh, well, I have to actually have the ground of my being able to receive this. And if I'm in full-on willful planning mode, it's not going to happen.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel this way. It's kind of a paradox being like, I feel very inspired and in a way nourished, not necessarily in terms of sadhana, but in terms of, intellectual engagement. And I feel very blessed to be able to be, studying right now and in this program. But I definitely feel that I don't have the space to receive sometimes. Like, I just feel I feel like up until I started this program specifically, like I think everything in my life, it was kind of like, oh yeah, I can do that. And I can do that. And I can do that too. And I can add that. And then I added this and I was like, oh, and I have reached my limit,
Full stop.
Full stop. And then the challenge of not having the container for my retreats and sadhana that I had, like Paul's retreats haven't continued. And so I haven't had a space to go since before COVID. That has really affected just my relationship with my sadhana. And so that kind of balance, the scholar practitioner balance, we might call it, is really challenging sometimes. And there's so many forces beyond just the overwhelm and the stress. There's so many forces academically that draw you kind of away from that embodied and space where you can receive the grace. You're in a really good place at CIIS because I feel like they're designed to accommodate that in a way. That's kind of their legacy and their history and their stamp is that's what they do. Is that what you've experienced there?
I would agree that would probably be the umbrella. And then there's a way in which the program that I'm in, because I'm in anthropology and social change, there's a certain rigor, less toward the spiritual and or the somatic. And I think in some ways it's what I can contribute over these next few years is that I'm often in dialogues in class where I will tap into the feeling, the sensation of something, like, why are we saying this and feeling that, like, how are we engaging the contradiction of what's actually a felt experience, and how are we moving toward these concepts, or what we all call like theory and praxis, like how are we moving in some ways where we're theoretically building this kind of new language, this new vocabulary for engagement. And yet what I realized right at the end of the term, it was like the other vocabulary I had started to merge with it. For the first like few months, as I was sort of taking in this new concept, these new ways, this just a set of texts that I had never encountered before, and a history that I hadn't encountered, like I found myself like completely saturated. And yet the only way I climbed out, like at the end of the term, to form my own questions and write papers, was that I actually returned to my spiritual foundation. Like, how do I know this to be true from this other lived experience? And so how can I incorporate this lived experience and the analysis in a way that is kind of building the bridge that I think we're all aiming to do as scholarly practitioners, practitioner scholars, which I kind of call myself my practitioner scholar, in that order.
Like to prioritize practitioner, I get that.
Yeah, I do. I'm like, the day I call myself a scholar will be, you know, something, the penny dropped. I don't know. But like, I just sort of feel like there's definitely an amping up academically around scholarship. And I just feel really fortunate, as you know, many of the scholars that I've been in relationship with for the last 25 years, that being in relationship with and coming from the Hatha Yoga embodied somatic perspective and being philosophically, religiously, you know, spiritually engaged with the scholarly approach has really what has formed the foundation of my teaching, for sure, but my studentship as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of go, well, do I call myself a scholar now because I have the stamp of some kind of degree? Because truly speaking, you know, I've been self-studied, you know, all of these years of being a yoga practitioner, and it was, and always had the philosophy and the texts.
Yeah, that resonates with me, because I feel that I wouldn't call myself, I don't call myself a scholar. Certainly I don't have a PhD, so I feel like that's generally the thing you're supposed to have before you can say that, you know, setting aside whether or not that's problematic. But yeah, it feels a little fraudulent. Like I wouldn't want to purely associate myself with kind of those parameters, I guess. But yeah, I'm really curious about this, and I'm excited, and I love that we've, you know, in a way are walking sort of parallel paths, and in the foot prints, is that what they say, of many people who've done similarly over the past several decades, and many, you know, people I've interviewed for this podcast who've started out as meditators or yoga practitioners and sort of became more deeply engaged with the traditions. And I guess when looking back to when I met you and how long I've known you and taking your classes in New York, I mean, I can see the seeds of it there. But last time we spoke, which I should mention for those listening, was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And it was one of the first podcast episodes. I mean, I think if we look back, it's like number 9 or something. And here we are. You know, I mean, I could have been much higher number if I'd been doing these weekly like I used to, but we're nearly at 200 now, and it's been a while. So what happened? How did you get this, you know, desire, this kind of inner prompting to study more deeply? Like what happened in your own sadhana, in your own explorations that inspired you to do this?
Thank you for asking. And as you're speaking and you asked me that, names of like wonderful scholars are coming to the surface. So I'd like to acknowledge them, because I feel that it is their presence in my life, starting early on with Paul Muller-Ortega, Bill Mahoney, Carlos Pomeda. I found myself like pulled toward the study that went deeper into the tradition, and that helped me understand if the philosophy that I'm studying requires this kind of intellectual hook, this intellectual kind of unpacking, how do I relate that to the way that I've experienced the asana, the way that I've experienced moving toward form in the physical, and just so that everyone who's hearing this knows, I absolutely love the physical practice. And for me, I'm saying this because it doesn't stop at the physical. It's again, the influence of the scholarship that I just named that helped me to create those connections between what I was grasping as a concept, right? As a cosmology, as a way of seeing the world, what I was grasping and how that actually felt physically when I could hold a teaching and experience its kind of movement inside myself. So I would say that that was like an early experience, and I don't know that I had an inclination then toward an academic life. I do know that the seeds were certainly planted for that kind of study, and so a lot of self-study happened, a lot of my own going deeper into texts. And then I would say then there is the next generation of scholarship that would be my peers and my sadhana family. And so Mark McLaughlin, Hamza Staten, Ben Williams. So that next, what I consider the next generation of scholarship, we were always in dialogue. We were like speaking a lot and co-taught and had these experiences of witnessing one another's growth and how the scholarship was an anchor in the material world and in the intellectual world, and yet the articulation was so important as a way of being able to hold, really to be able to hold the knowledge, and again, in my relationship with them, it was always like coming back to the physical. And it really was in more of an intimate conversation with Mark McLaughlin, who is at William and Mary. He and I were sitting at the same table you and I sat in for the first time we spoke together. And he asked me outright, like, have you thought about scholarship in your own, in your own path, in your own future? And then it was through him that I was introduced to James Mallinson, and then things just rolled in that direction. So when I went to London to teach there, I had an opportunity to meet with Jim, and it was through that exchange that I realized that it would be a really great program for me to engage in. And the Hatha Yoga project was also happening at the same time. So I'll just say one other thing about that, which is that I had, in a very sort of, again, funny way, thought, yeah, I'll do this. I'll take a year off. I'll take a sabbatical and I'll do an MA program. Like, what kind of thinking was that? Really, though, I did limit my teaching and I moved to London. And so I did get to, I did get to just be with my own process and thoughts, and it certainly wasn't a sabbatical. So I don't advise that. But I guess in some ways, academically, you could say that often scholars, when they take their sabbaticals, are having the opportunity to go deeper into their own subject matter. So in some ways, that was actually, very true. I just would say it wasn't a rest.
Yeah.
It was
same.
It was an amping up. Yeah.
So I'm curious, as you've been talking about kind of the road that led you here, there's obviously been a lot of scholar friends along the way. And even when I remember taking your class, you would have, was it Mark McLaughlin who would come and teach in your class? Yeah, I remember him. And so you always had this way of incorporating scholarship in some form or another, or at least deeper scholarly perspectives into your classes, which is one of the reasons why I always really loved your classes. And so you were, primed for it in a way. What you were having these kinds of higher, at least more nuanced conversations with other scholars. So, but when you actually got into academia, did you have any kind of culture shock? Was there? I'm asking because I want to know if you share some of my challenges.
Okay, Jacob. I will be transparent here and in this dialogue with you, also because I think it's like really critical at this moment. I had not been in school for nearly 24 years prior to going for my master's. And my undergraduate study was artistically inclined. I was at NYU, I was in the theater department, and then shifted to Gallatin. And that's when I started to realize that I had this aptitude for kind of curating my own path towards study. As much as I was a thespian and actor, I started to study Eastern philosophy and religion and also sociology, and found myself attracted toward feminist thinkers and so forth. So again, in my undergraduate, these were, I would say, like, it was like a buffet, and I just sort of tasted a little bit of many things. So when I got to SOAS, the 1-year master's there, and 1 year I'm saying for international students, so it was a 1-year program, we're pretty much assigned, the core curriculum, and then we had an opportunity to take an elective, and I chose Sanskrit as my elective, both terms. And now comes like the deep dive into shock. So, I appreciated that the structure, the university structure would have these like 10-week sessions. And then after the coursework, you'd kind of dig into your papers. And then similarly, you'd go into the next term, you'd have a 10-week of courses and of your coursework, and then you would dig into your papers. And most of every class, really, the assessment of your learning was a 3,000-word essay. So within that year, all things combined, 4 classes each term and a dissertation, we're looking at somewhere around, right, like 50,000 words or something, right, in that year. And so let me first start with this. I am a natural speaker, right? Theater training and extemporaneous speaking and making connections and being in dialogue is natural, is comfortable, is what I gravitate toward. It just feels like it's a part of me. Writing is one of the most kind of challenging disciplines, and it was interesting because I encountered what I felt was my own, failure in the area, because like I felt so, I did have some pride around discipline. Like, I'm a disciplined person. I can structure myself this way. I get down and I do the work. And yet, it was a whole different thing. And I'm going to add the part that I want to say was illuminating and also dramatic, which was that my advisor at SOAS requested really that I go for testing. And because that what she had observed and what I was starting to speak through, she said, I think you're a neurodiverse learner. I'm encouraging you to go through this testing process. And they, generously did that for me at SOAS. And it turned out that what I had always sort of thought to be true, that I am dyslexic and have a really hard time processing what I read, and that it requires like several steps to go from the reading to the brain to the page, that everything that I did took 3 to 4 times as long.
Yeah.
And that was a real turning point for me. And I will say, and because we're having this kind of conversation, from a sadhana perspective, I had concepts about myself as a learner that were, conceived early on in my education about my own capacity. And then I found ways through my entire education to kind of work around where I struggled. And then it was confrontational, right? And then I found myself in an MA program going, I can't quit. And yet this has to be one of the most grueling things I've ever considered. And the thing is I'm in for more. And so here I am.
And then you're like, but I'm going to go do a PhD now.
Well, going from what you and I have spoken about, and in my contribution to the Radical Pedagogy Conference, I will say this. I am looking to bring something to scholarship and to academia around neurodiverse learning and around ways to, for lack of a better word, test, assess, that incorporate different forms, and how learning can be, just how it can be demonstrated or shared as like other ways of knowing, other ways of forming knowledge. And it just feels critical right now, because we're in a period where we're so painfully seeing the effects of white supremacy on our culture, the effects of racism, sexism. It's all been there, right? And yet academia seems to hold many of those systems in place through the way that knowledge is shared and assessed. And how does the learner end up feeling about themselves? And does it perpetuate the sort of insider, outsider, belonging, not belonging, capable, incapable, able, disable? It all can kind of be wrapped up in this notion of, am I performing well? Am I giving you what you've asked for? And that's where I feel like, as I continue to do this study and start to understand what my project or contribution will be, is that I am going to be going from some sort of personal narrative, lived experience, and that education is incredibly important to me. And so, we'll see how I can add that voice.
Yeah, that's so, I love how you just kind of moved into that direction of, essentially leveraging your own lived experience to shape. It sounds like it's shaping your research in a way. Is that right? Like, you haven't actually said yet, but what is the project itself in your PhD? Do you have sort of a key arena that you're looking to explore?
I believe it's going to continue in terms of the classroom and what we've spoken about. So reimagine the classroom. What does the classroom look like as an inclusive, diverse, thriving, vocal place where each body is able to be in its own body, in its own power, in its own strength? And how does the learning happen when we're in cohorts and when we're in community that has the power to uplift and share.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I'm looking at is whether there are pedagogical practices that support or inhibit those spaces.
Mm. Yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about this because I'll give a little bit of context for the listeners. I'm including this interview in kind of a map of an editorial campaign that we're exploring over the next year that I'm calling The Future of the Yoga Teacher, which actually we did a series of panels a number of years ago, like 2018, I think, on that very topic. And I interviewed people based on, or we did panel discussions based on different kind of professional intersections. So like yoga teacher and therapist, yoga teacher and spiritual advisor, etc. And I wanted to return to this topic just because I think, that was obviously pre-COVID. And, a few different things have happened, I think, in the time since then. One has been this reckoning with all of these kind of social issues. And one is sort of the decimation of, what was previously the yoga studio world in the wake of COVID and how everything has closed. So there's, and then, and all these yoga teachers who still want to be teachers are sort of asking themselves, like, where do I go from here? Whether it's professionally, like, how do I find students? Or like, how do I actually shape and evolve my own professional offering, like we're doing with scholarship, but other people are doing in other ways? How do I evolve the very idea of what it is to be a yoga teacher? And that's why I think, your project of reimagining the yoga classroom, which is what you talked about in the Radical Pedagogy Conference. So anybody that's listening, please go watch that. Available now on EPTV. It really, to me, is a beautiful kind of expression of this very topic. And so I guess maybe and we can repeat a few of the ideas, that's totally fine as well. But what is the issue, in addition to kind of white supremacy and the issues that you've been addressing in terms of inclusion? What do you see as sort of the main obstacles of the way in which we see the yoga classroom right now, and why that inspires the need for change?
I almost want you to repeat the question again for all of us.
Let's see.
It could come out differently. It could come out differently. Yeah.
I think I can. So what are the sources of exclusion in the current idea of the yoga classroom, or the current format of the yoga classroom, that is inspiring this need to reevaluate the idea of the yoga classroom?
Okay, I can approach this. I can come at this simply first with one of the things that I saw early on that was a source of exclusion was able, right? Yeah. So ableism. And what came to me early on in teaching yoga, because I started in my early 20s, and what was possible, right? What I was able to do and what was possible had come also from a dance background, from being an athlete, from being very physical. So when I started yoga and learned the asanas, there was ability that had been, cultivated in other ways up until that point. And the turning point for me was that when I started to teach, I began to notice that, right, not everyone that was in front of me or in the class had the same level of access. And so I'm going to kind of work with the word able and access and kind of hold them up. Because when we're able, it's like receiving the instruction from the teacher, put the hand here, do this with the other hand, have your body situated in this way. And it's kind of given as a set of instructions to create that, that shape. And then there are real ways in which one body may not, right, perform in that way. And so early on, my own eyes were saying, what is it that I'm saying here? What am I saying? What am I presenting that may exclude those from being able to actually access what it is that I'm doing, or that I'm kind of understanding about the energy or that form. And so I think that was at the basis of my own educational process around becoming a certified Iyengar yoga teacher, because over and over again, I was having the experience in class with Iyengar yoga teachers that I would have this experience of an asana, having approached it the way that I knew to or had been taught to. And then all of a sudden, this other nuanced approach would come, and parts of my body would kind of wake up or kind of come together. And all of a sudden, the posture was new. And it didn't mean that, if I'm doing I'm just basically like, if I'm doing a standing pose, that my right palm was on the floor in Trikonasana. It didn't mean that. It might be on a block. It might be on something else. But what happened was using the support, or using the instruction, which created a different kind of action, that the access changed, right? And it was less about my ability to perform in a way that looked a certain way or matched an idea. And it was more about, is there access to what is unseen or underneath the surface of that appearance? So that's where my own studies started to go. So I would say that one of those sources of exclusion have to do with, not as a yoga teacher, and I know that this is popular, giving students choices that look like, if you feel like, if you want to, because that certainly isn't in the kind of training that I've had, though I understand its benefit. It's actually, as a teacher, developing the eye of observation and understanding access, so that when you're giving choices, you are actually continuing to lead. And by lead, I mean guide people into where their own access point may be. I hope that was clear, but that's...
Yeah. No, I like that.
That's one.
That idea of access. Yeah, that was really well put.
I think that, again, to walk bravely into the subject as well, is that I didn't think about myself early on in my yoga practice as a white woman teaching yoga. I really didn't. And again, these ideas, and they're not just ideas, they're visible, right? The things that we're saying now, the things that we're saying now about cultural appropriation, or what kind of space does a white woman create as a class, as a community? What kind of space because of that? And really, identifying my locations and recognizing that has an impact is something that I wouldn't even have had the language for.
Yeah.
Right. When I first started teaching. And I appreciate that I do now, and that I'm learning about it. I'm learning about it and understanding that, of course, what I can be saying or doing can have an impact, and that others that may not gravitate or want to go toward, because it doesn't feel safe or inclusive. So, and boy, that you just used the S word.
Do you have a fraught relationship with that word?
Well, you and I have both been, in our sense, engaged in sadhana.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even want to say doing sadhana. We're engaged. in sadhana. And the S word, the safe word,
the safe word,
the safe word is that engagement with sadhana is about courage, not safety.
Yeah.
What is the safety in sadhana is that we have either a teacher, a guru, a master that we actually do experience safety under their guidance, or not. Some don't. We have a community. We have then in ourself the understanding that the safety is the bigger net, right? That allows us to, how should I say, this sort of like this bigger net that is really the truth of our existence, which is we're really not in control here. We're really a part of the big sort of, the multi-dimensional connected web of life, right? And that can feel safe to kind of lean back and go, I'm a part of this bigger thing, bigger relationship. What really I'm saying is that sadhana requires courage. It requires bravery. And it's not necessarily that we're going to encounter safety as we excavate our own egos, as we look at those concepts or ideas that we hold about ourselves, that we really want to transform. And so for me, like, how does safe relate to fire? Because we know that fire can warm, and we also know that fire can burn. It's the same element. So anyway, I use the S word, and I might have gotten myself off.
No, you didn't, because I'm really glad that you went on that little tangent, because I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think what you had just said, I'm gonna edit that out and use it in a little word blurb for you, because I feel like it's really interesting, and it's one of the best articulations of kind of from the perspective of sadhana, and from what we hold to be true about the possibility of sadhana, how we relate to that more, I guess, let's say, contracted understanding of safety, because you were kind of articulating a larger idea of safety that sometimes feels, from the perspective of that contracted view of safety, unsafe, right, in certain instances. And so you said something interesting that I'm curious if you think is what characterizes. You said something about control, right? In terms of that, let's call it small s safety. So do you think that what characterizes the need, the desire, the yearning, and the longing for that is a desire for some kind of control, and that when you are engaging with sadhana, you have to, and you are trying to access the big S safety, which is also the big S self, right?
Yeah.
Is that you have to kind of relinquish that control in a way?
I definitely think there's a tension there. And so whether it's like a full letting go, relinquish, or whether or not it's the sort of meta view of the tension between, it's important. And I guess where I'm going, and maybe it's another word to add in, and it's become somewhat of an overused word, but I'll throw it into the conversation anyway, which is autonomy. So if we're looking at the spaces that we're creating, like in community and in the classroom, can there be an invitation for autonomy? And then what does that really look like? So if a yoga class is a led experience, right? If there is the relationship of teacher-student, student-teacher, what does autonomy look like when we're in that kind of exchange? And so again, if autonomy in my experience, autonomy is, and having the capacity to use your voice, to express your needs, to go in a direction that that feels right, that where you're able to kind of step forward. And even if the stepping forward doesn't feel safe because it's going to be challenging, you're choosing it. So it's, in a sense, it's related to choice, right? So you have autonomy and you have choice. And so we could be saying, I'm into this thing. I want to be engaged in a community, in a practice that means that I'm going to be pushing against what it means to be safe. And yet I'm choosing to go this way, or I'm choosing to engage my body in this way, or I'm choosing to put my, my camera on in the virtual yoga class. Like, you have the choice, and then that helps to start to form how the dynamic, and the exchanges between the teacher and the student. So I'd like to add that is another aspect of, like, again, this is me riffing with you on things I've thought about for a long time, but I really am attempting to, and I feel like the virtual yoga class world has been, we say, viparita karani, like the topsy-turvy, the sort of like turned everything, in reverse. Because here's the extraordinary thing, right? It's like, you're not in a yoga class and everybody's kind of going to get the props, and we only have this many bolsters, or or this much space at the wall. No, every single person in their own, home, world, office, wherever it is that they're participating, has all of these various moments of choice, right? Choice to turn on your camera, turn off the camera. Choice to do that multiple times throughout the class. The ability to kind of leave the space if you have to have a bio break, and you're not sort of missing something, or waiting in line in some lobby to use the bathroom. But I'm really bringing up things that I saw come up in classes. And then if we have in our own worlds, in our own environments, the ability to use a prop, to use a wall, to take support, to do alternatives, we're starting to actually experience that there's a lot more of oneself saying yes at every stage than kind of being, I'm just going to use the word, herded into like this or that, and so I think that the virtual space has opened up the vocabulary of yoga teacher, the invitation around inquiry, and allowing the student to engage themselves on a much deeper level.
I mean, wow, I you have a very optimistic view of this, of the virtual yoga world. I mean, I feel like most of the things you hear now is just, it's like lamenting the loss of the shared space and the energy of that. I totally hear what you're saying, and it makes a lot of sense. And I hadn't thought about it in the ways that you're kind of articulating. I personally find that I have too much choice a little bit, and that what it leads me to default to is kind of my sort of frenetic nature at this stage of my life, where I can more easily stop this, look at my phone, go to the bathroom 10 times, and so in the face of that, I guess maybe that's part of the challenge, right? That's sort of what that becomes the object of your sadhana in a way. So yeah, I mean, I guess the follow-up question is that are there any ways that you've observed that there's some limitations that you're sort of missing from the in-person experience of the classroom?
Well, forgive me for not wanting to go toward limitations. I'm not going to, because I want to go toward opportunity. And when I say opportunity, what I mean is, how often do we need to be in person with our yoga teacher or our community, let's say that we have been in a community online for some time, but now I feel the opportunity that I have with the community that I work with is we're going to be together for 1 week in X month. And that the opportunity is to have this kind of both personal and interpersonal kind of exchange that we're having online when we're not all in the same room, breathing the same air. However, we are in community, and we do recognize the other bodies, the other names, the other, the other people that are with us. And then we come together in a kind of concentrated moment where we get to kind of form a container to be in retreat, to go deep, to connect in that way. And then we get to go and assimilate that, which I think is more conducive to how we actually make the teachings our own. Because otherwise there is, and there can be, and we've seen it, there is a tendency to consume yoga practice like we consume other things, or to kind of feel good, or to kind of have that, high. It's like something we want to have and consume. And the truth is that the practice is already cultivating you. It's already kind of doing its work from the inside out. And that the coming together can be a celebration, and then the going apart is a time for assimilation. And I feel that in my own sadhana, I've respected the time in proximity and the time away as a kind of vital pulse, right? So that we're actually able to recognize how we've internalized something, how we've progressed, rather than constantly having input. So that's why I'm referring to it as an opportunity instead of a limitation. I know as a teacher that I can't hear the and the moans and the deep exhalations when I'm teaching virtually and everyone's muted. So, in a room, that might be a collective moment of laughter or a sigh. Okay, everybody just, take a resting pose, right? Where I don't actually get to hear those things. So we could call that a limitation because I can't hear, or, there might be the tone of someone's skin that I can't see as clearly, right? As if I wasn't right up against it. I do my absolute best in this medium to get right in everyone's space. That can be a limitation, or it can, again, be an opportunity to harness. I mean, I can tell you, Jacob, if your camera was on and, you were in my class, you ain't going to be checking anything. You're not going to have a second to check a phone or run away. You'll have the choice to. But the thing is that that's the beauty of teaching, right? Like, even if we think about it intellectually, if we think about it in ideas, like what does a great teacher do? It's like somehow they launch, like it's like they hook. They like kind of hook you. And whether they're hooking your attention, right? Or they're kind of creating a focal point. So the same thing, your attention, your focal point. Good teaching asks either the question or creates a pace or sort of sets a tone that you get hooked. Not to me, but to something that it's doing to you. And I think that, from what you've shared, yes, we're not getting hooked so much now because the tendency is disperse, right? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that you're going towards opportunity, because that's obviously an optimistic view, and there's always opportunities everywhere. And I'm glad you brought up the shared moaning, because one of my favorite things to do is to moan on the exhale in a yoga class. And I have to say, people don't do it here, and I think people probably think I'm strange, but I feel like that was a very common practice in the New York yoga community. Pre-COVID world.
Yeah, pre-COVID exhalation. It's like doing simhasana in every every pose somehow. Yeah.
So is there anything else that, in terms of this kind of reimagining of the yoga classroom, are there any kind of really key themes that I know you've been doing a series of conversations and classes around this very topic. So what are some other kind of big themes that have come up for you as you've been having conversations and exploring this topic and thinking deeply about it?
I really, really enjoy hearing a student's insight, revelation, expression of understanding. And so, having said that, and I always frame it in this way, that, traditionally, as we've experienced, in the US and historically, a yoga class is nonverbal, meaning the teacher's talking, but everybody else is nonverbal. And what I can imagine in how we start to reshape the classroom is that there is more inclusion of others' voices. So would it look like, passing the baton, from pose to pose? Would it look like more of a improvised kind of experience or practice? And that somehow this expression of being able to practice in community, and who's leading and who's following and who's speaking and who's listening, and that there is much more fluidity between the roles, because what is built is a shared kind of language. Again, I don't want to say a shared language that's like, that becomes its own exclusatory like thing, but that there is, I should say, and that there's this way that underneath all of that, there's a trust built, right? And then that trust becomes that big, that bigger that web that big S safety, that lean into, because there's a trust in how a community has come together, where there's not a defined hierarchy or role or position, that everyone's sort of taking responsibility for the creation of that space.
So I'm really curious about this, because I think it's really fascinating that this is where, how your own perspective and approach has evolved. And I don't know if you're going to be comfortable talking about this or not, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So, I know about you, and that you've studied with traditional teachers who are part of a context that is a bit more top down, let's say.
Yep.
And there's very much a sort of disciplined expectation about the way that you approach the teacher, you relate to the teacher. It's very structured, right? So I'm curious how the evolution of your relationship with this as yourself a teacher has shaped your own perception of that kind of structure. Has it become problematized for you as you've been investigating these things, or or is that another tension that you hold kind of within yourself, and kind of are exploring? So I'm just curious, because I feel the same. Similarly, I've had experiences in communities where that kind of traditional role of the teacher is observed, and And so is there, I guess another way of asking this is like, is there still a need for that type of relationship in a world where we've become much more flexible about the classroom to accommodate inclusion?
Mm. Okay, I'm going to go for another word. Can we replace role with respect?
Mm-hmm. Let's do it.
Because let's do it. Let's say that, yes, in the traditional schools that I've been a part of, they're, like the teacher is like Maha, they're like the great grand one, and the question that arises for me is, are they projecting that, or is it projected onto them? Because these sort of failures in the teacher-student relationship and real failures like abuses, and I am not, and I don't want to go off there.
Right.
What I will say though is, I can have the utmost respect for the teacher and still in that exchange be situated across from, right? Or, accompanying side by side. And I think that it is both, right? Being able to discriminate, to identify, is the teacher projecting that role? Is the student projecting that role? Is there mutual respect? So I'll just let that sort of sit for a moment, because I'm not moving around your question, because I am, in a sense, certainly, I don't want to say a product of, because I'm not a product and I'm not for sale. But I have, not just in yoga, like I came from a traditional like ballet school, growing up. And believe me, the ballet master with the stick, like I came from that. So this is sort of what I'm saying about learning and about education, and where we pick up ideas around who I am in that space. And I think that the more that we're in dialogue about who are we all in that space, we're not all trying to be one thing, right? We want to all be who we are, right? Who we are. And that means that, we show up with that capacity to have the autonomy to make choices. We are showing up as we are, and we're comfortable, or we get more comfortable sharing our voice, sharing our thoughts, sharing our opinions. And so I'm envisioning a community where that is what is at the forefront, is that there's a respect for difference. There's a respect of the tension of, yes, I'm saying this and I may be leading you now, and can we shift that? Can you lead tomorrow? Can it happen in such a way, or can one student choose another student to lead? Like how does that come into being? And so part of my study is looking at the ways that community has formed around cooperative, around mutual aid, around thriving, recognizing, okay, there's this big C system, there's this big capital system that is, it exists everywhere on our planet. And within that, recognizing the tension of that, is there another way that we can be relating, that we can be starting to create an alternative, right? So it's I think one of the most important things that I've learned, and I shouldn't say learned with an ED, it should be an ING, that I am learning is that holding the tensions, holding the contradictions, the oppositions, the all that's kind of thrown in there is an opportunity, right? And I'll bring it back to my sadhana, an opportunity to start to recognize in myself when I become fundamentalist, when I become like, to see that the very things that we're fighting against we aren't doing in our own processes, you know, our own thinking. So that's why this experience of holding the tension of the do and the undo, or the push and the pull, like holding that tension is actually an opportunity to elevate. I should say elevate while still, you know, with the feet on the ground, but elevate our capacity to see and our capacity to be with.
Mm. Mm. So, I mean, I imagine a part of this process for you is to perform some experiments in the classroom. Have you have you made any, you know, have you done any kind of experiments in sort of playing with this idea and how it actually manifests in your in the spaces that you're you know, holding?
I have, and I have not yet analyzed it for its success or failure. Though I'll say this, as you know, and you knew me in this space, when I started the teacher's practice in 2008, 9, I started it in my own home studio, and before it moved to Kula, and then later virtual. The teacher's practice was a gathering place, and I very much was leading that, right? And I would come, and, you know, there'd be philosophy and there'd be a theme. And I would say I was leading it. However, what I began to see was how so many relationships were formed because of that space. So people came for this led experience, the inspiration, the kind of guidance maybe of a more senior teacher. However, what was really powerful was the kind of groupings, the pairings, the formations of support, and the collegial sort of feeling in that space. So I had the opportunity in 2022 to lead the teacher's practice online. And it was coming off of my, you know, master's dissertation, and really thinking, well, if I am going to put this to the test and I'm going to start to work toward this project, how can I kind of reimagine the teacher's practice, right? So what I did in 2022 is I had Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks as the central text. And so we read that book throughout the year and explored, you know, the themes, the ideas, chapter by chapter, in the way in which we are engaged as teachers. And so, you know, that was a real departure for me, because I can lean into the yogic canon, right? But I never, you know, I never sort of like saw myself as somebody who could take something, you know, from another discipline and say, well, let's use this here as a way for us to be able to put into practice what Bell Hooks is envisioning for the classroom. And so Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom. And what I will say experimentally is that what happened is that we did gradually, over the first 6 months, move away from a traditional asana class and me leading. So normally my role was like, let's do the talking bit, the philosophical premise at the beginning, and then we're gonna, you know, put that into the body, right? And what ended up happening about 6 months through is it became much more of a conversation of teachers than a physical practice. However, I asked them, take these ideas to your teaching and start to see what here you can engage with. So I did that for 2022.
That is
And
so cool, Nikki. Like what an interesting experiment, and also really inspiring to hear that you kind of let it evolve into what it needed to be. I mean, did you find that was did you,
terrifying.
were you challenged by
Terrifying.
that? I mean,
Terrifying.
I would find myself instinctively going back into like, I need to shape the space, let's get the XYZs in order. Yeah, how did you accommodate those reactions within yourself?
Again, that's why I say it. I haven't gone back to the analysis yet. All I can tell you is that, and I've said terrifying a few times, because this is the part where we need to crack into academia, right? Because having the structure, having the syllabus, having the plan, having the student perform in X, Y, and Z way, having this due at this time, all of that we could say is the like container, and that's how the learning is going to happen, right? The thing is that that's gonna reinforce the roles, right? It's gonna reinforce the like performative aspect of studentship. And so it was terrifying to say, like, I have this inclination here to go here and to start to see what comes out of or what can be applied to the yoga classroom pedagogically from another way of seeing, literally from another discipline, from the intersection of disciplines, and I feel like that's our future. Our future is this broadening of where we meet and where the crosses happen, right? Not like staying sort of fundamentally on one track, because none of us are that one thing. I mean, that's a strong statement. I don't believe that all of us identify as one thing, and that, and that's the truth. The more we identify as one thing, the more it will exclude the alternatives, right? Mm-hmm. So it was, there were definitely moments where I thought, oh, Nikki, just teach a yoga class, like just teach an asana class. And I have to say, like, I don't really know. I haven't analyzed the success or failure, because one of the only ways a teacher may know that is attrition. So how many people registered at the beginning of the year? How many people were really kind of there in it by the end of the year? So attrition. Yet in this virtual world, like I absolutely, and in time zones and in the complications of people's lives, like I don't know really if it was attrition due to content, if it was, we signed up for something for a year and there's always attrition because life just does that. Mm-hmm. So all I can say is that, again, was not safe, was courageous. But I certainly wasn't safe in the sense that there's a lot of safety in the structure of an Iyengar yoga class and how it's built and how it progresses. When you kind of shake up, well, that's not what we're doing here. We're gonna look at it this way, and we're gonna have a dialogue. Yeah,
wow. So this was this, I'm just curious, I'm really curious about kind of the practicalities of it. So was this a weekly offering, or was it a monthly offering?
Monthly. We did,
okay.
yeah.
And you do like a chapter each month, yeah. And then sometimes you would maybe like say a little bit about it, and sometimes it was more open and flexible, and it just sort of emerged.
Yeah, we did chapter by chapter. I think we had finished the book by July, and then there was an integration exercise where students paired up or got into groups of 2s or 3s to have their own dialogue of discovery around something that they were learning. So, yeah.
It's fascinating. I think it's so interesting. And I mean, incorporating a sort of a reading group into a yoga class is very up my alley. So I love hearing about it. And I think it's really inspiring to hear about what you're doing and about how your teaching practice is evolving. I do think it's courageous, but it's also so, there's a humility to kind of acknowledging the changing cultural, social context, such that you submit yourself to the process of evolution. And I think like you should be commended for that. And it's really inspiring. And I'm so glad you're leading what, as far as I'm concerned, is a really kind of radical, back to radical pedagogy, a radically responsive and innovative just way of rethinking how we learn and how we accommodate inclusion and different ways of knowing how we create community within the framework of a yoga class. So I'm just really inspired to talk to you about this, and thank you so much for doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you so much. I'm going to say, just like on a final note, that well, I usually speak, all of you that are listening to this, and something will arise in my awareness, and that's where I go next. It takes someone else at times to see the direction you can go in. And I mentioned that my advisor, Sean Hawthorne at SOAS, sent me for this testing because her response to me was, "You found all of these brilliant ways around this, this challenge, right? This quote unquote learning disability. You found all these ways to create an opportunity for yourself to learn." And the reason that I'm saying that is that it was her encouragement, even through my dissertation, and then in recommendations for the PhD, that someone else says, there's something here, there's more there, you can go there, and I just I want to say that again, that for me is the bigger web. That is the grace, is that what I can't see in myself, that someone I trust, right, someone I respect sees, is enough to take that step, to take that brave step, to take that courageous step. And that it really comes back to, then why would we have a teacher? Why do we have a teacher? Because that's the nature of how that exchange could be, is that the student inspires the teacher. And then the teacher is inspired and gives more. And then the teacher gives something and sees this incredible thing happen for a student, and some part of their potential just becomes visible. And then that support is there to see that the student takes that, and goes with it and runs with it. So I am always in gratitude to these traditions that I've come from, to the structures that I also had to challenge from within, and notice that, as difficult as those structures can be, I can always find myself in it and recognize like where and how the growth is happening.
The person that you mentioned, this was one of your professors at SOAS, right?
Yeah, it became my advisor.
Became your advisor. Wow. Yeah, that's the story you always want to hear, that one of your professors like inspired that next part of the journey. So I'm so glad you found that. And that you turned this challenge that, for other, I just love that you found out you were dyslexic, or you confirmed something that you'd had a hunch about for a long time. And then you turned around and said, I'm going to do a PhD anyway. That's like, it's really amazing and really inspiring. So it's awesome. So Nikki, this has been fabulous. It's always so lovely to talk to you, and we will probably talk again in another 100 episodes. Hopefully not 6 or 7 years from now. How can people find you? Where do people go to take your class? I should say that Nikki will be, maybe I'll just plant the seed so that she'll put a fire under her ass to record these for us. But she will be submitting some classes to Embodied Philosophy. But I actually, now listening to you, I kind of want to offer a space for you to do something a little more like you were describing. So maybe we can talk about that at some point. But besides that, where can people find you? How can they get in touch with you? How can they jump on board on the Nikki wagon?
Oh, Jacob. Okay, so my name is Nikki Costello, and that is also my website. So if you do a Google search, nikkicostello.com, you'll get to me. On my website, you'll get a little bit more around my education and background and, so forth. And there's also an online classes tab. So I've, in the last year, actually December 2021, opened, so to speak, my own virtual studio called Nikki Costello, The Practice, and it's on union.fit. And so what has been really incredible, because this is probably closer to the scholarly approach, right? I've been able to, create an archive, create a library of over 300 classes that fall under different titles, different themes. There's always an objective in terms of what's happening in that class. There are different times, hour-long classes, hour-and-a-half classes, 30-minute classes. And now I'm offering an advanced practice. It's called the Advanced Practice. And so these are ways that you could connect to jumping into a live class, dropping in to a live class, and or becoming a subscriber, so to speak, that is access to a really rich library learning space.
Thank you, Nikki. So you heard it, nikkicostello.com, right? Am I right? Yeah. Yes. Go check out Nikki. And if you didn't listen to our previous interview, it was also a lovely conversation that we had a number of years ago. I think it's episode 9 or something like that. And you'll see Nikki soon on Embodied Philosophy, hopefully not too long from now. And if you haven't listened to her lecture on that was a part of the Radical Pedagogy conference that we did last fall, do go check that out. It's available now on in the library on embodiedphilosophy.com. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you, Nikki. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jacob.